Welcome back to Behind Your Mind. I want you to imagine something for a moment. You're sitting across from someone you care about. Maybe it's a friend, a partner, or a family member. On the surface, they seem deeply insecure. They often talk about how they've been misunderstood, mistreated, or overlooked. They may even cry in front of you, apologize profusely, or claim they're the ones always trying harder in the relationship. And yet somehow you always end up feeling like the bad guy. You walk away from conversations second-guessing yourself. You feel confused, guilty, and unsure of what just happened. You wonder if you've been too harsh, too insensitive, or maybe you're just imagining things. What if I told you that this might not just be your imagination? What you may be experiencing is a lesser-known but equally damaging form of narcissism, covert narcissism. And understanding it might be the first step in protecting your mental and emotional health. What is covert narcissism? We often think of narcissists as bold, charismatic, arrogant people who crave attention and dominate conversations. That's the classic or overt narcissist. But covert narcissists are different. They don't necessarily want to be the loudest in the room. Instead, they may hide their narcissism behind masks of vulnerability, humility, or even self-pity. On the surface, covert narcissists might seem sensitive, emotionally wounded, or deeply introspective. They might tell you stories about how no one understands them, how people always betray them, or how they've suffered so much. And because they seem so vulnerable, you feel compelled to comfort them, protect them, or even apologize for things you didn't do. But underneath that, there's often a deep need for validation, control, and superiority, just like any other narcissist. The trickiest part about covert narcissism is that it doesn't look like narcissism at all. Instead of demanding praise openly, covert narcissists might sulk when they're not praised. Instead of bragging loudly, they may fish for compliments through self-deprecating remarks. Instead of rage, they use guilt. Instead of attacking directly, they use passive aggression. What makes it even harder is that they can often come across as deeply empathetic, at least at first. They may listen attentively to your problems, mirror your emotions, and build strong emotional bonds. But over time, the relationship starts to revolve more and more around their needs, their feelings, and their pain, and you begin to shrink. Psychologists call this pattern a vulnerable narcissist. It's a type of narcissistic personality that expresses entitlement and grandiosity in indirect, subtle, or even emotional ways. Let me tell you about a woman we'll call Elise. She started dating a man named Jacob, who seemed different from anyone she'd ever met. Jacob wasn't flashy or arrogant. He was introspective, emotionally open, and constantly talked about how much he had been hurt in previous relationships. At first, Elise felt special, chosen even, for being someone Jacob trusted. But soon, she noticed that she was constantly walking on eggshells. If she disagreed with him, Jacob would withdraw emotionally, sometimes for days, making Elise feel like she had done something horribly wrong. Whenever she tried to express her own needs, Jacob would shift the conversation back to himself, saying things like, "I guess I'm just a terrible partner," or "No one ever understands what I go through." Elise began to feel selfish for having her own feelings. Eventually, she realized that the relationship was entirely one-sided. Everything revolved around managing Jacob's emotions. And the empathy that once felt so genuine now felt like a trap. This, in essence, is the cycle of covert narcissism. And it's just as psychologically draining as overt forms, sometimes even more so. Let's break down the core traits that define this type of narcissism. While each person is unique, some patterns tend to show up repeatedly. Passive self-importance. They may not shout about how amazing they are, but they still believe they're uniquely misunderstood or intellectually superior. Victimhood as a weapon. Covert narcissists often use emotional manipulation through victimhood. They twist scenarios to make it seem like they are always the ones suffering. Gaslighting in disguise. They might invalidate your experience by quietly suggesting that you're overreacting or being too sensitive.
فراغ الإيجو hidden بإنسكيورتي.
Any criticism, no matter how small, is taken as a deep insult. But instead of exploding with anger, they might crumble into a puddle of guilt or silent treatment. Silent manipulation. Rather than overtly controlling, they manipulate through subtle guilt trips, withdrawal, or emotional distance. Recognizing these signs isn't about labeling others, but about understanding the dynamics that could be affecting your mental health. One of the most heartbreaking places covert narcissism can manifest is in parent-child relationships. When a parent is a covert narcissist, the child often grows up in a confusing emotional environment. Unlike the obvious emotional abuse that comes with an overt narcissist, the covert narcissistic parent might appear loving and self-sacrificing, but there's always an invisible string attached. Their love is conditional, based on how well the child fulfills their emotional needs. Let's take a look at Sarah's story. She was raised by a mother who always said things like, "I gave up everything for you," or "No one appreciates how much I do for this family." Sarah grew up constantly feeling guilty for having her own needs. If she wanted independence or disagreed with her mom would cry and say, "After all I've done, this is how you treat me?" As a result, Sarah learned to suppress her emotions to maintain peace. She became hyper-aware of others' feelings, but disconnected from her own. This emotional conditioning followed her into adulthood, where she often found herself in relationships with emotionally manipulative partners. The subtlety of covert narcissism can leave deep scars. The child may not even realize until much later in life that what they experienced was a form of emotional neglect, not because love wasn't given, but because it was always tied to emotional debt. Covert narcissism doesn't just affect romantic or family relationships, it also shows up at work. Let's say you have a coworker who's always kind on the surface, but constantly undermines your ideas in meetings. Subtly, of course. Maybe they agree with your suggestion but reframe it as their own, or they throw you under the bus when things go wrong, all while maintaining a soft-spoken, "I was just trying to help" demeanor. They might portray themselves as the overworked underdog, always being taken advantage of, always sacrificing for the team, while quietly stirring division or positioning themselves as the secret victim hero of every project. Unlike the overt narcissist who wants to be the boss and take all the credit openly, the covert narcissist is more strategic. They want admiration without having to appear as if they're seeking it. They want control without confrontation. And that makes it very hard to call out their behavior, especially when they've already charmed others into believing they're humble, caring, or selfless. If you've ever tried to set a boundary with someone who has covert narcissistic traits, you'll know it's one of the most confusing and emotionally draining experiences. Let's say you express a need. "Hey, I felt uncomfortable when you shared my private story with others." Instead of apologizing or reflecting, they might respond with something like, "I guess I'm just a terrible friend then," or "You always think the worst of me." Suddenly, you're the one apologizing for expressing how you feel. This tactic is called emotional reversal, where your valid concern is twisted into an attack, making the narcissist the victim and you the aggressor. Over time, this dynamic erodes your sense of self. You begin to doubt your own emotions. You stop speaking up. You silence your discomfort just to maintain peace. And that's the true cost of covert narcissism. It teaches people, slowly, subtly, to abandon themselves. One of the defining signs of covert narcissism is their inability to offer sincere apologies. When they do say sorry, it often sounds like, "I'm sorry you feel that way. I guess I'm just the worst then. I was just trying to help, but fine." These aren't apologies. They're performances of remorse. Designed to end the conversation, not to repair or understand. True accountability requires vulnerability, empathy, and an ability to hold discomfort. Covert narcissists, driven by fragile self-esteem and hidden entitlement, often lack the emotional tools to sit with the discomfort of being wrong. So, what can you do? Understanding covert narcissism is one thing. Knowing what to do about it is another. Here are some ways to start protecting yourself. Learn to trust your gut again. If you constantly feel confused or guilty in someone's presence, that's information. Healthy relationships don't make you feel small, anxious, or invisible. Set boundaries and hold them. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to step back. You're allowed to choose peace over guilt. Don't try to fix them. The covert narcissist's wounds run deep, And unless they're actively seeking therapy and showing consistent change, it's not your job to save them. Reclaim your narrative. Journal. Reflect.
Talk to a therapist.
The more you understand your own patterns, the easier it becomes to break free. Choose self-compassion over guilt. Remember, it's not selfish to protect your mental health. It's survival. One of the most healing moments for many survivors of covert narcissistic abuse is this: naming it. There's immense power in understanding that what you experienced wasn't drama or being too sensitive. It was a real psychological dynamic, subtle, manipulative, and deeply damaging, but also something that can be unlearned and escaped. Covert narcissists operate best in the shadows, in silence, confusion, and self-doubt. But by naming what's happening, by educating ourselves, by listening to stories and sharing our own, we bring it into the light. And that's where healing begins. If any part of today's episode resonated with you, whether it reminded you of a relationship, a memory, or a pattern you're trying to break, know that you are not alone. We'd love to hear your reflections in the comments below. Have you ever encountered someone who seemed kind on the surface, but left you emotionally drained? Have you started setting boundaries with someone who doesn't respect them? Or are you just beginning to connect the dots? Your story might help someone else feel seen. And finally, as always, this podcast is here to offer insight, not diagnosis. If you're dealing with narcissistic abuse or emotional manipulation, please seek guidance from a licensed mental health professional. And hey, if this episode helped you understand yourself or someone else just a little better, please consider subscribing, liking, or just sharing this with someone who might need it. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and remember, I'm right here with you, behind your mind.